You're listening to The David Knight Show.
All right, and we have our guest who's all ready to join, so we will delay the talk about what's going on in Ukraine and escalation that's happening there. We'll delay that till later. Joining us now is Davis Younts. He's a lawyer who's very heavily, and of course, former JAG, and he's had a lot of experience as a military law in the service. He's got a wide range of qualifications in a lot of different areas. He's been a pastor. He's helped people get religious exemptions in this vaccine mandate situation. And we talked to him a week or two ago, and I wanted to get an update after what has now been put into the NDAA. They're still separating people in the military. So I want to talk to him about the current status and even what this change that's been inserted into the NDAA, what that's going to entail after it finally becomes after it finally goes into effect, and it's going to be a while before that happens. So joining us now is Davis Younts. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Hey, good morning. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. That's coming soon, isn't it? Only about
That's
a week
right.
or so. That's great. Okay, Biden has not signed this thing yet. It's been put into the bill. He says he's not going to veto it. I don't know, when they did the NDAA back in last year, it went into effect. The 2021 NDAA went in. He signed it first week of January or something. So probably looking after the holidays before he signs that. And then there's another 30 days before it's going to go into effect. So tell us what is happening now. I know people are still getting kicked out. And then what you think is going to happen after he finally does sign it and the 30 days have happened and it goes into effect.
Yeah, so let's talk about the language first. And there's a little bit of history to just talk about the importance of the NDAA, right? So the NDAA is the way Congress exercises some control over the executive branch when we talk about DOD. So what happened last year is there was a fight to do this last year, right? There was a fight to use the NDAA in the mandate. That wasn't done. But what Congress did do is say the worst case scenario for a military member discharged for refusing the vaccine mandate for no other reason is a general discharge. That still takes away significant benefits, including GI Bill and other benefits, prevents any kind of retirement, future service, and all of that. But it was a concession. Right?
Let me ask you, does the general discharge, does that affect your VA benefits, your health benefits, or do you still keep those?
You keep some of them. If you have VA disability, you keep that with a general discharge. So it's better, right? It's better than certainly a worse service characterization, but it's not great.
And it's not all of them.
And it's not all of them. Yeah, you certainly lose. Yeah. I mean, the most significant one that most people worry about is the GI Bill. That's huge. You also lose things like veterans preference points for federal jobs, state jobs, county jobs, things like that. A lot of employers don't want a military member with the DD-214 discharge paperwork that says misconduct, and then there's a general discharge. So it does have an impact, but it was an improvement. Before that, hey, we were being threatened with court-martial. That's what we were being threatened with before the last NDAA. So that's where this started with the NDAA. That was a step. Now what the NDAA has in it is language that says, hey, the vaccine mandate ends. There is no more vaccine mandate, and 30 days, the DOD has 30 days to implement it. That's it. That's all the language does. What it does not do is address what's going to happen to those who've already been kicked out, or what's going to happen to those that are in process, in some stage of the process, or not. So once this is signed into law, we can expect the DOD to put out new policies within that 30-day window. And individuals who are somehow haven't been affected by this yet might be saved. And I say somehow haven't been affected by this yet. There are very few people currently serving in the military that haven't already been impacted by the mandate.
That's right. Because when you say in process, I would think that everybody's either taken the vaccine or they're in process about this, right? So it sounds like it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do a lot, right? And so a lot of this is going to come down to DOD policy and what's going to happen as far as the implementation of this goes. So here's an example, and I won't get into too many details, but last week I was in an administrative separation board for an Army officer over 17 years of service, right? Less than 3 years till retirement, who the board found that by refusing the vaccine, he engaged in misconduct. We disagreed with that. We argued it wasn't a lawful order, but that's what the board decided. And they recommended separation with an honorable discharge. So the question is, I mean, that's a prime example. What is the Army going to do with someone like that?
That's
The
interesting.
vaccine mandate ends. That's the only thing that's preventing him from continuing to serve. What are they going to do? Are they going to say, okay, you know what? That individual can continue to serve. They can get to the retirement. Or are they going to say, no, we gave you an order to get an unlawful order, but we gave you an order to get this injection. You didn't. And so you violated that order. So we're still going to kick you out for violating the order.
Yeah, I saw that report, and that's why I wanted to get you on. Because I knew you were involved in that, and it was amazing to me. It was the same day that the thing was, passed by the Congress. The same day they separate him out, and I didn't know that they gave him an honorable discharge. It's almost kind of admitting that they know that this is wrong, and that they're the ones who are acting dishonorably. But that is amazing, and it does. I didn't realize that it doesn't do anything for anybody who's already in process now. And then, of course, let's assume that. They don't get separated. There's still going to be marks against them in their file, right? There's nothing to stop that.
That's
either.
right. That's right. Yeah. And so the best way to kind of lay this out is just to use an example, right? So we'll just use an example, and you can use me as an example. That's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I submitted a religious accommodation to the Air Force. It was denied. I submitted an appeal. It was denied. The same blanket denial for the same reasons that everybody else sees, same blanket language. I was given an order. I was given 5 days to take the injection. I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That 5 days went by, and I was anticipating potential adverse action. And then what happened is a federal court issued an injunction in the Doster case in Ohio that protected me. Okay. That protected me from adverse action or being separated.
Mm-hmm.
But many of my clients in a very similar situation, but just a few days earlier, would have received an official reprimand. Okay, in the Air Force, it's a letter of reprimand. In the Army, it's a general officer memorandum of reprimand. But if that had happened to me, that would be in my official file. It would be a part of my official record that I'd been reprimanded for failing to follow an order, and I would be potentially processed for separation. Even if I wasn't, and even if I chose to stay in now, then what I would be facing is that letter of reprimand would impact my performance report as an officer, my annual performance report. And so what I would have as an officer competing for promotion with my peers is a reprimand in my file, and a referred performance report. And so that's just as a starting point. So obviously I would not be I wouldn't be promoted. I wouldn't be eligible for command positions, other things. It would end my career. It would end anyone in a similar situation's career. So that's like step one. The other thing it does that a lot of people don't realize, and this gets into the weeds of the way the military works, but if you retire, if you're an officer who retires with that reprimand in your file, it triggers what's called a grade determination review board. What that means is the Air Force, the Army could reduce you from a grade, say lieutenant colonel, to major for retirement purposes because of that paperwork in your file. Right. So it's this weird follow-on process. So again, in my case, if there hadn't been an injunction, if I had received a letter of reprimand, I'm attempting to retire. I may be retired as soon as this month, may happen here this month. But I would have to then go through an officer grade determination review board, and I could be reduced in rank for retirement purposes because of that reprimand.
Wow.
So that's just an example of sort of everyone that's in this process. But then, I mean, and again, interrupt me with questions, but that doesn't even talk about what the DoD policy is going to be for everyone that continues to serve, for those who aren't going to retire or get out.
It just smacks of vindictiveness. It's just amazing to me to see this.
Right. And so again, we have to look at the history of what we've seen. The Navy and the Coast Guard, we talked about this before. Navy and the Coast Guard were the worst offenders. They were the worst offenders. In the height of this, the Navy was doing things like telling people, hey, you can't leave the ship. You're deployed on a cruise for 8 months. You can't even get off the ship. You can't do a single port call unless you either have the vaccine or booster, but even before the vaccine was mandated, and the boosters are not mandated. But that's what they said. There's nothing that would prevent the Navy from continuing to do that moving forward, even with the mandate ending, because we're not saying you have to take it. We're saying you can't leave the ship if you don't take it. The other thing the Navy did was they said, hey, if you're not vaccinated, you have to report 14 days early and quarantine for 14 days before the ship leaves the dock.
Wow.
To deploy. Navy did that. Navy also said you can't go to church.
Really?
If you're not vaccinated. Okay. That happened to my clients. So all of those coercion tactics, all of those things that were in place before there was a mandate, there's nothing now that's going to say just because the mandate ends that the military isn't still going to engage in those coercive policies, regardless of religious affiliation, regardless of pending religious accommodation or not, regardless of how long that litigation takes to move forward. So that's going to be very, very interesting to see. Will the DoD actually engage in a full sea change here? Or are we going to see the same kind of coercion and discrimination that we saw even before the mandate was official?
Wow, that's amazing. Now, you mentioned, and I wasn't aware that they had done anything to mitigate the mandates a year ago when they were passing the NDAA. How did that break down? Because, the Congress has not changed at this point. We still have the same people there. We've had an election, but, we haven't had any new people come in or anybody exit since the election. That isn't going to happen until January. So it's the same people that are voting on this NDAA in 2020 that did it in 2021. How did things shake out a year ago? Do you have any idea? Was there no? The Republicans still don't have a majority. Kevin McCarthy is saying, well, this is we're going to block this if this doesn't happen. Well, they don't have any more Republicans there this year than they did last year. Did they not have any Republicans sign on to any of that stuff last year?
Well, the biggest difference is there was a group of like 12 senators that came out and supported this change to the NDAA this time. So there were enough senators, Republican senators, that took a stand this year that didn't take a stand last year. And so there would have been no agreement, and the Senate could have filibustered the NDAA if they hadn't done something in the House. So you got House support behind it. So, logically, what you hear when you talk to representatives, when you talk to the political insiders here is, oh, now the statistics show us that, this isn't as much of a threat, or the pandemic is waning, or we know so much more about natural immunity now. But the reality is they're also facing tremendous pressure because of the recruiting crisis, right? There is a recruiting crisis. And so they're looking at this as a potential way to mitigate that crisis, to say, well, there's a lot of people that don't want to be under this mandate, so they're not joining the military. So I think there's a perception that this will help solve the recruiting crisis.
Well, the story needs to be, I think, how they are going to continue to punish people, even with this small thing. If they're worried about a recruiting crisis, that needs to be the point of publicity, to say, do you really want to join an organization that's going to be so vindictive and disregarding of the Constitution and your religious liberty? Because nothing is really, as you point out, you had a big change in Congress, in the Senate, but they didn't have enough votes last year or this year in terms of Republicans in the House to really change anything. So if anything's changing, it's some Democrats who have changed. They've changed because they're concerned about recruiting, but they're not concerned about what's happening to the troops, because they didn't do anything to ameliorate what the punishments that have been meted out, or to stop these punishments that are going to continue to happen, right?
That's absolutely right. And I think they're missing something critical. And this is a critical point. This isn't, so many people get caught up. This is about a particular vaccine or, particular medical product and a particular mandate. It is in part, but in larger part, this is about religious discrimination. And it's about the fact that they're mandating a product that still isn't, the FDA version of it still isn't being produced. So you're talking about military members who are seeing the executive branch, DOD, ignore the law, ignore Congress, ignore the law as far as what's already on the books. So it's the handling of this, and it goes deeper. I mean, this goes into woke policies, this goes into CRT, this goes into transgender issues, and just the anti-extremism training that I've sat through, right? Yeah. All of that comes into play. The recruiting crisis, yeah, absolutely. I think the mandate impacts it, but there's so much damage that's been done to morale of good people in the military by the way this has been handled, even before COVID, that I do think there's going to be significant recruiting issues moving forward.
I agree. Yeah. People who are anticipating going into the military, there's enough of them that are going to see all the things that you're talking about. It's a full spectrum of a lot of different things. And it's like, do I really want to get involved in that? When you look at the CRT and all of the, as you pointed out, the woke policies, I prefer to call them political correctness, because I don't like to let these people pick their own terms. They're not awake. They're Marxists. They're politically correct Marxists. But, when you look at all of that stuff there, that is so telling about where the institution is. And why do you want to join yourself to an institution like that and invest years of career into an institution that's going to act the way this institution is? And that even is bigger than the Pentagon. It goes to the Congress as well, that has absolutely no concern about the people who are in the service and who have dedicated their life to this. They have no concern to protect them. All they're concerned at this point is, well, how can we put a Band-Aid on this and make this problem not appear so we can recruit more people into the system? They don't want to fix the system.
That's absolutely right. And I think what we're missing too, and this is where my faith plays a huge part in this, but what is the moral standard? What is the ethical standard for the military today? We talk about integrity, we talk about character, we talk about values. That's all part of the military. We talk about all of those things in officer training. We talk about how that undergirds everything we do. But what is that morality? What is that ethic? What is that shared ethic? To me, the shared ethic of the military, senior leaders in the military, is secular humanism and atheism.
Yes. Yeah.
And that always leads to tyranny, right? So if their moral framework, if their worldview is secular humanism and atheism, then we see tyranny as a consequence of that. So that's part of the problem as well. That's a much deeper spiritual issue that we need to be addressing. But you can't. And part of my frustration too with recruiting, not to get off on a tangent on that, but they keep lowering standards, and it just makes me just shake my head every time, because I think, okay, keep lowering standards. We're going to lower standards. We're going to lower standards. You're telling everybody, hey, we're going to lower standards for the Navy. We're going to lower standards for the Army. We're going to lower these standards. That's not how you recruit heroes into the military either. I mean, think about what you and I perceived as military service when we were young, when we were growing up. Even just like G.I. Joe, there was this idea of this integrity, these values, putting others before yourself, all of these things, this framework, the good guys, right? And it was about achievement. It was about, do you dare? Are you even good enough to get into the military? Are you even good enough to do this training and take part in this? And now what we're saying is, hey, we'll lower the standards for you, and everyone should feel welcome and comfortable and happy in our military today. And I don't think that's recruiting. I don't think that's doing anything for recruiting either. You want to bring someone in and have a successful organization, build up that organization, make the standards higher, and challenge people. And that's going to be better long-term for our military as well.
You're exactly right. I remember when that was the selling point. I remember the commercials were looking for a few good men. I remember the commercials saying, we get more done before most people wake up.
That's right.
They started Ozark 30. Well, it was about a challenge. It was, and that was what they were looking for. They were looking for people who were going to take that challenge and work hard and try to extend themselves. And that has just disappeared with all this diversity, inclusivity, and equity, and all the rest of this stuff.
That's right. Yeah. The Army went from be all you can be to an army of one, right? And the Air Force, we used to say, aim high, right? Aim high, go bigger, achieve more, become great, and that was part of it. But you change that, and military service just isn't as attractive anymore.
Well, and you look at it, it was a thing that went around a few months ago, viral on social media, where they compared the training of the recruitment videos in China, Russia, and the U.S. It was so sad, if anybody remembers that. I mean, it was a traditional stuff that you'd see in the Russian and Chinese armies, where they're doing challenging stuff. And it's like, are you good enough to get this done? I mean, this is really tough stuff. Are you have what it takes? It was the other stuff, that it's this woke LGBT type of thing, and people would respond and say, well, all you got to do now in the military is just be able to push a button. Anybody can push a button. That's what we're looking for. We're just looking for diversity. It's like, really? We're in big trouble.
Right. Yeah, that's still, there's still a core of our military that needs to be able to carry a rucksack and march for 20 miles, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, it's absolutely great. New recruitment slogan says, my son has joined the military. We have low standards. Yeah. Yeah, do it. Yeah, anybody can do it. That's what they're. I guess that's what they're saying. If you are the right demographic, we want you. We're looking for a few demographics and only those demographics. And if you're not that demographic, maybe we don't even want you. Is there anything else that's on your radar about this that you want to tell people?
I really think, the key in all of this and my biggest fear and what I've been praying through and talking to other people about is just because the military ends the mandate does not mean this fight is over, right? We don't know what's going to happen. We still have significant litigation going on in federal court regarding the religious discrimination as well as the illegality of all of this. And I still have, I'm going to be talking to an Army officer this afternoon who's facing separation over this still. That's still in process. And again, even if the mandate ends, they may still move forward to try and separate him under the allegation of violating a lawful order. So we need more. The hope is that in January, February, the Republicans in Congress will move forward with legislation that does more than just this, but how they're going to get support for it, what support's going to look like in the Senate, we don't know yet, but there's going to be a lot more work to do. So we just can't lose sight of that.
Yeah, I remember when this thing was running through from a political standpoint, there was a couple of different amendments that were offered in the Senate to try to restore benefits to people or to give them the option to be reinstated into the service if they wanted. And I remember one of them was from Mike Lee, and it was going to require 60 or more votes. And another one was only going to require a simple majority. And I forget why there was that difference there. But you never heard any more about the one that just had a simple majority. The one that got all the publicity and the one that some Republicans signed on to was the one that was going to require 60, and there was no way they were going to get to that. And I said, this is just virtue signaling. So I was kind of surprised to see that they did anything. But now the more we look at it more closely, it looks like it wasn't a surprise at all. It looks like it was kind of more than anything, it was a head fake, and that's really sad to see that. So the fight goes on, and you're right at the center of that, Davis Younts. Thank you so much for doing that. Tell people again your website where they can get in touch with you. You got a legal practice, and you help people with religious liberty issues and other things like that, as well as what's going on with the military. But you got a lot of experience in JAG and other things in the military, and you're working with a lot of people over this vaccine mandate and separation stuff. Tell people how they can get in touch with you.
You can follow me on Twitter at Davis Younts, as well as the website, which is just my last name, Younts, YOUNTS law.com, younts.law.com. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much, Davis. Appreciate it. We'll be right back, folks. Stay with us.